I'm very pleased to get to speak to you today. I have a ton of questions for you. And actually, what I wanted to start with, I've actually heard you speak many times recently because you've been working on and thinking about establishing interfaith connections, right? To find some common ground. I've seen you speak to Muslims, for example. And you view the world through a biblical perspective, Rabbi. And what naturally comes up when you speak to Muslims is, the story of Ishmael, right? The son of Abraham. So could you tell me, and us more generally, how do you view this story as relevant to today, to a relationship between Jews and Muslims today?
So firstly, thank you for having me. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. And I love your question because it's so relevant today, with all the confrontations and wars being fought in the Middle East, which is essentially between the Arab Muslim world and the Jews in Israel, Israeli. And it's already spread all over the world. So I think it's extremely relevant. And again, thank you for asking that. So you mentioned looking at the world through a biblical prism, biblical perspective. Let me define what a biblical perspective is the way I understand it. Because even the word Bible also has many stereotypes and myths and misconceptions. So for me, the biblical story is actually a universal story. Obviously, is the Hebrew Bible. But remember, the Bible becomes the Old Testament for the Christians and becomes the basis of the Quran in many ways, because everyone begins their story with Adam and Eve and Abraham and then Moses. And just as there's variations and different ways it diverges, but the essential principles that Abraham taught was about virtue and about chesed and about charity and about kindness and generosity and gratitude are universal, especially today with 1.8 billion Muslims and 2.5 billion Christians. It's really become universal. So there's an expression in the Bible that says Abraham Av Hamon Goyim. He was the father of all nations. Abraham had a son called Ishmael, and he had a son called Isaac. Respectively, Ishmael becomes the progenitor, the ancestor of the Arab Muslim world, later become Muslim in the 7th century, and the 6th and 7th century. And then Isaac, in turn, has also two children, Esau and
I was going to get to that. So now you're spoiling. I was going to get to Esau.
Okay. No, I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'll just say that bottom line is that Abraham's house was very lively, we can say, because basically the roots of the nations of the world were being planted there. But let's talk about Ishmael. So Abraham, the Bible tells us, could not have children with his wife Sarah. So Sarah suggests to Abraham, why don't you bear a child with Hagar? Hagar was an Egyptian princess who had also married Abraham, and they have a child called Ishmael. Interestingly, Ishmael, the Hebrew for Ishmael is Yishmakel, that God will listen. So his very name is a godly name, which makes sense because Abraham was a godly person. Later, Abraham and Sarah would have a child called Isaac. So there you have, in a sense, the beginning of the Jewish people, which is through Isaac, the beginning of the Ishmaelites, which would be the children of Ishmael, which would be the Arab and later the Muslims. So to me, that is not just fascinating, it's mind-blowing. Because when you look at the confrontations that are existing today, all you have to do is go back almost 4,000 years ago, and you find them happening in the home and tent of Abraham. Because Ishmael and Isaac did not get along. The Bible tells us that Sarah tells Abraham that Ishmael is corrupting Isaac, and he should send him away. Later, we're told that Ishmael returns and reconciles and makes his peace with Isaac. So if you look a little deeper into the story, you actually can identify the roots of many of the conflicts today, as well as solutions. That's why I really put a lot of emphasis. Actually, this may sound funny, but with AI, we've recently begun to send out messages that are also translated into Arabic. They're lip-synced. So they can be, I do it in English, but then it can be done in Arabic. I'm actually working on one right now. Because I really believe that around a year ago, after October 7th, I put out a message on video on YouTube, a call to my Muslim cousins and friends. And I basically was saying, what would our grandfather Abraham say? So we may have different opinions, but we go back to one grandfather, his name was Abraham. What would he say about the times that we are living in today? And why is it not possible for us to be able to find common ground despite our differences? And that to me, I mean, I'm not naive. I understand there's deep issues here. There's wars being fought, blood has been shed, many people have been killed. So I'm not ignoring that. But I would like to believe that maybe if we can invoke the Abrahamic vision, maybe we can find some common ground. I'm not saying with everyone, but at least with many people. And that is my objective.
Okay, so I would like for you to tell me a little bit about that Abrahamic vision that you have. But first, I would like to challenge you on what you've just said, because as far as I understand, and I've spoken to quite a few Muslims, also Muslims from the Palestinian territories and cities, there are a couple of things that make communications here more difficult. The first is that unlike you and me, many Muslims, and mostly in the Middle East, they do not see the Jews of today as the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They do not see them as the ancient Israelites. So that's problem number one, right? Because you're talking to someone who doesn't view you in the same way that you view yourself. So problem number one. Problem number two, the Torah, according to mainstream Islam, is not trustworthy, right? Because the whole point of Islam is that the Torah, yeah, it used to be true. It's even mentioned by name. It's called the Torah, right? But it's said that it's been given to the Israelites, who have in turn corrupted it over time. And thus Allah, God, needed to send a new and final prophet, namely Muhammad, right? The Prophet Muhammad. So how do we, you speak as if we can have a common language, but there's a key difference here in perception. So what do you think about that?
And I'll add a third question. There are many Jews that don't see the Muslims as being descendants of Ishmael, and they see them as being a fraud. So it makes it more complicated.
Okay.
I just threw in a third question.
Okay.
So excellent. I'm very glad you're asking. Here's what I would say. So as you know, there's a thing called divide and conquer. I don't think we can just change everybody's mind overnight. I would look to be very pragmatic and practical, people that are able to have a conversation like this. I've spoken with Muslims. I've even done podcasts and webcasts with Muslims. And I think that, I don't know the numbers, but I think there are quite a few intelligent, educated, that would not necessarily dismiss me and dismiss Jews as simply not descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I would look for the people you can have a conversation with. Look, it's like I do a lot of mediation in marriage, friends, partners, and business. Mediation is only possible if two people have something in common. If I say I don't even recognize you and I don't even want to speak to you, then obviously I wouldn't even come onto your program. So you have to find people that you can have a conversation with. Look, the Abraham Accords, which happened the last few years ago, look, there's a certain peace was created. I'm not sure all the conditions, maybe it was economic, cultural, but I am not, I feel there are enough people to talk to. And I think if you talk in a decent way, in a civil way, I don't think all Muslims think that I, who say 3 times in my prayers every day, and millions of Jews that talk about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob every day in their lives, will just dismiss my entire identity. If they did that, then it would be like me dismissing them. So I would like to find those people we could talk to. That's my response to that question, because I don't see a way it's like a non-starter. If you don't recognize me as an entity, then what are we talking about here? And I agree, that would be as far as with the truth and the veracity of Torah versus Islam. In other words, did Muhammad replace the prophet, the Israeli prophets? Did the Muslims replace the Jewish people as a chosen people? For the record, the Christians felt the same way.
Yeah.
That after Jesus,
we're going to get to that too. We're going to get to that too.
Fine. So again, being someone out there, And as I'm probably I've written books. I deal with many people from all backgrounds, and I have no issue with that. I'm not even preaching Judaism. I'm trying to get to a point and say, look, the fact is the Jews were here before the Muslims and the Christians. Anyone that denies that is just like denying reality. Now, you may say that it's not the same Jews. You can say whatever you like. But the fact is, we are here, and we're here for thousands of years, and we have a tradition that was passed on word to mouth, teacher to student. We have thousands and thousands of books. And that would be like saying that the whole medical establishment in this world are not real doctors. They're all fake. So again, if someone says that, I have nothing to say to them. So I would think in terms of, let me present in a very decent way. I'm not saying, for example, that the children of Ishmael are also God's children. They're also children of Abraham. Why is that a contradiction? Why can't you say a father had two sons? Why can't you say they were all creations of God and we're diverse and we have different approaches to things, but we have many things in common? I would like to hear the Muslim response to that question. That's how I would challenge them. Instead of just dismissing me, which is a non-starter, I would begin with that. And I would say, yes, Abraham taught. You know what he taught? It was a pagan world in which he grew up, Abraham. A pagan world which meant, it was basically self-worship, power, money, control, materialism. Everybody had their own agenda. Self-interest is what drove people. Abraham grew up in a home of an idol manufacturer. So he also grew up in a pagan world, in a pagan home. And he came, in his intelligence, he came to discover there's something more to life. Something he couldn't put his fingers on. Something transcendent. There's more to life than just ego, arrogance, power, money, control, sex, materialism, etc. And he began to search. And he found, in his own way, slow process, he found a higher purpose. And he realized that life is more about giving than about taking. It's more about virtue. It's about service. It's about some way changing the world around you, not just trying to gain control or gain power or become richer or more influential. And he started teaching that to his children, including Ishmael. He taught that to Ishmael. Ishmael was actually circumcised. And he taught it, of course, to Isaac. So the principles that he taught was essentially, as the Torah says, a life that he taught his children, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do justice, to do kindness and justice. Now, if a Muslim would tell me I disagree with that, then again, it's a non-starter. I think we all agree with that. Why? So now you have two brothers, half brothers, fine, Ismael and Isaac. Now they've turned into the Arab Muslim world, the Jewish world, and the Jewish world and Israel, and the Muslim and the Arab Muslim world. Can we not find anything that is in common? Or all you want to do is dismiss and say all the Jews are false? Let them go back to Europe, to the concentration camps. Let them go to somewhere else. They should. If that's their position, obviously we're not going to have a conversation. I think the reality is that Israel is strong. The Jewish people are here. We're outnumbered, but we still have strength. And I would look for those common grounds. The only way you can get anywhere. I don't see how we can begin if we don't have that element. And I would avoid the issue right now, whether Islam replaced Judaism, whether the prophets, the things we don't agree about, we can discuss a little later. Let's start with the things we do agree about. And let's present in a decent way. Now, again, I'm not naive. I know as we speak, people are being bombed. Innocent people are dying. We all know, people are being murdered in cold blood. I mean, I'm not denying or ignoring that. But I think if you ever want to get to long-term solutions, you're going to have to go into this world. I also would like to pose a challenge. In Muslim schools, we know what they're taught about Jews. I mean, where do you think the terrorists grow up from? They grow up in a climate of hate. I'd like to know, and you probably know this, you went to Hebrew schools, in Jewish schools, and I went to yeshiva, I went to Jewish schools, were we taught that all the Arabs and Muslims are evil and we have to destroy them? I never heard that once in my whole life.
I grew up in the 90s, so it was an era of peace in schools, you might say. That what we were taught was that we should always strive for peace and that peace will come soon. I also remember I was scared to be drafted into the army. So my parents would always tell me, "Don't worry. By the time you're an adult, there would be peace." I now know that this is a common saying that parents tell their children. But can I try to briefly restate your positions so that we can make sure we understand each other? So, with regards to what I asked about the Muslims, not the Muslims, but some Muslims, not even identifying you as a Jew. Like a Jew is not a real Jew, a real Israelite. You're a fraud in a sense. So your answer was, well, these are not all Muslims, so let's work with the Muslims that we can, because otherwise, if the other person doesn't even acknowledge you, it's impossible to really have a conversation, right? So that was answer number one. And answer number two, with regards to the supremacy of the Quran and of Prophet Muhammad, your answer has been, well, really, it's not that important. As long as we can have a dialogue, we don't really need to get into theological issues, right? So we can leave that for later, if at all, right? Something like that.
No, I think it's important, but I wouldn't begin with that, because you're just going to have a debate that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
An intelligent conversation, you try to find what is the common ground, what do we agree about, and then you isolate that which you don't, and you can then argue it. I'm happy to address it. I don't know if you know this, but I did a lot of research, and I'm a pretty good expert on Muslim fundamentalism. There was a great Muslim fundamentalist thinker who was a big anti-Semite, just for the record. His name was Khattab, Sayyad Khattab, Qutb.
The guy from Muslim Brotherhood.
Right. And he was actually executed by Nasser in Egypt in 1966. But he wrote like a 70 or 80 volume commentary on the Quran. And I've read him extensively. He presents the philosophy of especially Islamic fundamentalism. So I think we can have a discussion. I just know good conversations begin, let's find something common, and then grow, and let's address everything.
Actually, what you're saying makes me think. I do have some conversations with Palestinian Arabs, right? Arabs from the Palestinian territories, and they don't agree to come on this show because most of them are afraid. Sometimes they do if I blur their faces. But something that I've noticed is that when we discuss these things, the things about Ishmael or Ismael, as they would call him, and Ibrahim, as they would call, and the family connection, and like the meaning of the name Ishmael, for example, right? God will hear, or God has heard. These are the best conversations to have with them, because they really do see the world in this faith-based perspective. So I do really resonate with what you've said. I would like to go one generation forward to Esau.
If I can,
Sure.
let me just add one thing. One of the things Khattab writes about is how the Jews and the Christians have corrupted their religion by becoming very hedonistic, materialistic, and decadent. He actually visited the United States and went, of all places, he went to Hollywood and Broadway. So it just confirmed that the Western world, what he called the Jews and the Christians, all distorted what God wants. And it's only the Muslims. So I would say that I think a lot of Muslims feel that way. They don't feel that Jews are embracing God. They think Jews are just about money and power. And you know what? Between us, they may have met such Jews. I'm not in any way criticizing my own Jewish friends. That's not my point. But I think they need to be exposed to some of the more spiritual and the Jews who think in terms of God and purpose, and that I think is a big issue in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. So I let's move one generation forward, right? So there's Abraham, and he has Isaac and Ishmael, and then Isaac has Jacob and Esau. I think it's pronounced in English mostly, but I guess you would rather say Esav in the original Hebrew pronunciation.
Yeah, okay. Either way, we know who we're talking about.
Yeah. So I've heard it. I've heard it being said before that Esav is considered the progenitor of the Romans, right? Something like that. So can you explain to me how that goes? Like why does the Torah claim such a thing, or why do I understand that?
So I'll begin with the actual source for it and then elaborate a bit. And I'll quote Torah chapters. There's a chapter called Vayishlach in the book of Genesis. At the end of Vayishlach, it enumerates Esau's children and grandchildren, his descendants. And there at the end, it says Magdiel. Magdiel was the name of one of the kings that came from Edom. Edom was the country that was associated with Esau, as the Bible describes. And the commentaries explain, including Rashi, classic commentator on the Torah, that Magdiel zu Roimi. He says, Magdiel, that's Rome. So we know who it is.
Why
So
do
it's
we think?
identified with
Why do we think that Magdil is Rome, though?
Okay, so first of all, Rome in Hebrew comes from the word Ram. Magdiel is from the word Gadol. So it's basically a translation of that. And we're talking now sources that go back 2,000 years. Not talking about a modern contemporary interpretation.
I'll just
Secondly,
add. I'll just add for the audience that Rome in Hebrew could be construed as big or large, and Magdil has basically the same meaning in a sense.
yeah, correct. So this is called like a Masorah, which means this is the way the traditional interpretation of it. As I said, it's not a new modern interpretation. Second point, when you look at the collection, and just want to maybe for your listeners, it's important to know the scholarship of Judaism and the literature. We're talking about tens of thousands of books that were written over the years. Jews were people of the book; they were always writing. So we have many books are still in manuscript, but they've always been writing from the beginning of time. That's why the Torah is called the written Torah. It's in writing, and then there's the oral interpretation. So when we talk about commentaries, we're talking about commentaries that go back thousands of years. So when you look at the Talmud, for instance, at the Medrash, these are just different sources of this literature. So there's an extensive amount of material about what happened when the Jewish people were during the time of the Second Temple. We're talking now 2,000 years ago, approximately. They lived in Israel. Jerusalem was their capital. There was a holy temple. The first temple was destroyed almost 500 years earlier by the Babylonians. The second temple was destroyed by whom? It's a historical fact, by the Romans. Rome was not yet a Christian empire till Constantine came, but it was Rome. Rome destroyed the second temple. So in all Jewish literature, Rome is always associated with Esau, always associated with Edom. We call it Galut Edom, the exile of Edom, the exile under the children of Esau. Now, maybe here's not the place to go into extensive research, but this is like a given. I have no doubt that if we looked into details, you could actually trace where the Romans come from. Because the children of Esau, they transmigrated, just like the children of Israel. They transmigrated, that's how we trace them. It's not a secret here. And there's much more to be said on that the children of Esau, not all of them, but many of them would end up going into Europe and Central Europe, especially Italy and those countries. And Rome was an outgrowth from those children. And there's a lot of more mystical and philosophical meaning behind that, but that we'll leave either for another time or we can discuss later.
Okay, so I have two questions about what you've said. The first is the Romans themselves, they saw themselves, if I understand correctly, as the descendants of Aeneas, I think his name is. He's one of the heroes of the Iliad. He fought on the Trojan side. He was like the foil to Odysseus, right? Odysseus was this intelligent, brilliant guy on the Greek side, and then there was Aeneas, and he was the same on the Trojan side. So this is like the Romans' own founding myth, and that's my first question. I was wondering if we have anything referencing that, and the other.
We do.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing.
Go ahead.
The other question I wanted to ask is that the rest of the Europeans, and most of today's Europeans probably, or at least many of them, they're not exactly the descendants of the Romans. I think it would be better to construe them as the descendants of the so-called barbarian tribes right? That invaded and eventually toppled the Roman Empire, well, the Western Roman Empire to begin with. So, do these would you classify these tribes as also descending from Esau?
It's a good question. I'll tell you the truth. What I know, I know. What I don't know, I don't know. I would need to do research, coming from a more scientific and historic perspective for accuracy. I would want to do more research to be able to connect the Greeks, for instance, which you're describing, or the barbarians, as you call them, and other. But I will say this: remember, Esau's children didn't all stick together. I am sure they married, and they mixed with many others. As a matter of fact, you probably know this, that Esau himself, one of his wives, was Ishmael's daughter. So,
oh, I didn't know that.
Interestingly, yeah, it's clearly because when he heard from his parents, Isaac and Rebekah, that they told Jacob, "Go find someone from our family." So Esau decided, you know what, he's going to find someone from the family. Ishmael was the son of Abraham. So he married, it says, the names even, we know, Machlas and Bosmas. And the Abarbanel, interestingly, Isaac Abarbanel was one of the great commentators during the time of during the Spanish expulsion. He was in Spain. He writes that many of the problems we have today are because of Ishmael and Esau's marriage, because that produced two so-called opponents to Isaac and to Jacob. A lot more to say on that. My point is, a lot of what I'm saying is not my own deductions. You go back to Abarbanel, we're talking about 800 years ago. You have his sources. So traditionally, the children of the Romans ultimately, obviously, spread out. When you start thinking of all the people they interacted with and married and so on, I don't think you can make a direct line that every Gentile that lives in the Western world today, his great-grandfather was a Roman. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think that Rome was a type of a large empire that influenced, and I'm sure mixed with many, with the Mongols and with others. I mean, remember, Jews have the rule of intermarriage is a big issue by Jews. But the nations of the world mixed much. So I don't know if you're going to be able to find pure blood, Roman blood, in going directly to Esau. I think there's going to be plenty of mix. But this is the case. When you talk about the archetype and the personality and what Esau stood for in the time of the Bible, and very much how that influenced the Western world, that I think you can find very strong parallels. So I can't say that if you did a DNA test, you're going to find everyone is traced all the way to Esau. I don't think that's going to be the case. There's just too much hitbolalut, too much mix of blood and so on over the years. And especially after the many wars, and we know Sancheiriv, he exiled people, so people who lived in Rome are living somewhere else now. So I just want to qualify what I'm saying. But overall, we can talk about it, I would say, more in archetypal and general terms. That's the way I would approach it.
So yeah. What can we learn symbolically from the fact that we can symbolically construe, at least according to this narrative, we can symbolically construe the Arab and Muslim world as being related to the line of the Israelites through Isaac, and mostly through Isaac, right? And then the second generation, the Western world, essentially, is connected through Esau, through Jacob, right? And it is Jacob, of course, who has later had his name changed to Israel. So Israel is essentially the brother of the progenitor of the symbol of the Western world. And that's also interesting because the Western world has adopted a religion that's based around an Israelite from Israel.
Exactly. And their God that they identify with is a Jew.
Yeah, that's the guy I meant, right? An Israelite from Israel, which also, by the way, much like Islam, supersedes the Torah in a way, right? Because in not in exactly the same way, because in Islam the Torah is corrupted, and in Christianity the Torah is not corrupted, but it's not finished, right? So it's not exactly the same. I guess the Torah has a higher
By
status
the
in
way, do you
Christianity.
all Muslims feel the Torah is corrupted? Is that like
Yes,
a
that's the basic premise in the Quran. It's not some extremist thing. The
so why
Allah.
did Muhammad build so much of what he taught from the Torah, and why did he try to cater to the
Okay,
Jews?
so here's the thing. According to the Quran, and I'm going to try to put this in a light with which most
No, I'm not
Muslims
looking
will
at you
agree.
defending Islam. I'm just
Yeah, no,
wondering. Yeah.
but I want to represent Islam fairly here, right? I don't not trying to bash anyone. So I think what a Muslim would say is that the Torah is mentioned by name in the Quran. Okay, it is mentioned that the Israelites had the Torah, okay, but they corrupted it. So they were chosen. Okay, they were chosen, but I think they lost their chosen status because the Torah is no longer trustworthy. But it doesn't mean that there is no truth at all in it. There
Okay,
was a
I
Torah.
got it. I got it.
Yeah, there was a Torah, but the Torah that you read today is not that.
And you know what a good Jew would respond? It's very convenient for you to say that, because if you don't say that, then Islam has no validity. You have to say that. You have to
Well,
invalidate Torah, or
they
else why
have
do you
to
need a
say
Quran?
that. Okay, so they have to say that because it's in the Quran. That's the thing. Because the entire
Yeah, but
Quran
why
from
does the
start to
Quran
finish.
say it? But we would say, why does the Quran say it? Because it's very convenient.
Okay.
If you don't invalidate, a Hertz rent-a-car, why would anyone rent from Avis?
I actually wanted to discuss this with you because
Okay, but let me answer your most important question.
yeah.
So let me respond like this. I'm going back to Abraham's teachings. This is the essential foundation of Abraham's teachings, which I believe are universal today, and definitely the foundation of Jewish thought. And that is that God created the world, a material world, where God concealed his presence from us, gave us free will, put the human being on earth, and said, I'm giving you a mission. Your mission is to take this material world, which can be very selfish and hostile and violent and self survival of the fittest, dog eats dog, take that world and turn it into a beautiful divine home, a beautiful garden for me. In other words, don't give in to your materialistic and seductive nature, but bring divinity. What is divinity? Transcendence, love, stronger than hate, kindness, stronger than evil, beauty, light, stronger than darkness. And you're going to have a battle. The world is a battle. Life is a battle. Every one of us, as he explains in the book of Tanya, has a battle between the animal soul and the divine soul. The animal soul wants to serve its own needs: eat, sleep, pleasure, money, power, everything that comes with that. The divine soul wants to change the world. The divine soul wants to reflect on what is the purpose of life. What am I here to accomplish to make this world a better place? And there's a battle within each one of us and also collectively. All the wars fought between nations, between communities, and even the wars that we fight with ourselves is essentially this story. Who is going to prevail? The end of the story is that we will ultimately, the divine will prevail over the, we'll call it over the material, but it's going to take work. So every good deed we do, every sacrifice, every virtue that we teach ourselves and our children are meant to introduce that light into this dark world. Now, Abraham embraced this. He taught it to his children. And everyone knew, it even says in the Torah that Abraham was told there will be challenges. The Jews will end up in a nation called Egypt where they ultimately will be enslaved. And there'll be battles fought over this because not everybody wants to agree to this. People in control don't want to give up control. And in many ways, the battles between Ishmael and Isaac and between Esau and Jacob, it says when Rebekah was pregnant with these twin boys, Esau and Jacob, she asked God, why is the pregnancy so difficult? So God said, because you carry two nations inside of you, and they are opposed to each other. One is going to be pursuing materialism. He's going to be a warrior, Esau, and the other one's going to be a scholar. And they will fight with each other now and forever, meaning forever for all generations. And it even says in the commentaries that this is the battles that the Jewish people would fight with the nations of the world. In a way, it also explains anti-Semitism, the irrational anti-Semitism. Why is there anti-Semitism? What's wrong? What did the Jews do to you that you want to gas them, expel them, and so on? One of the reasons is because the Jewish people always represented nonconformity, just like Abraham, and it's a threat to people who are in control and in power. Mordechai refused to bow to Haman. So if you go through the history of our people, you see the wars, and you see also, interestingly, the wars over Israel and Jerusalem. What's interesting about the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews, they're all fighting over the same little piece of land. Everybody wants control of Jerusalem. Whether it's the Crusaders, whether it's the Muslims, whether it's the Jews, destruction of the temple. So what you really see, if you connect the dots, the bigger picture is it's a war between reconciling and integrating higher purpose and transcendence, godliness, in a material world. And everyone has their own way of doing it. And some feel the only way to do it is by destroying the others who are not chosen. We would never say that Ishmael was not chosen. Ishmael has a role to play in God's plan. Ishmael is the son of Abraham. Everyone's part of this role. Christians too. It's an interesting Maimonides, Rambam writes, that, and this is a Jew writing, 1,000 years ago, which was not easy times for the Jews. He writes that God in his mysterious ways allowed Christianity and Islam to thrive because they bring the word of God, they bring Mashiach, they bring the idea of unity to all over the world. The Jews were a small number compared to Christians and Muslims. So this is, even though we may disagree with some of the principles, but we see them also part of the divine plan, which is why we're told that God approached both the children of Ishmael, the children of Esau, by Sinai and said, I'd like to give you the Torah. They rejected it. But ultimately they embraced parts of it, at least, through the birth of their religions. So I would say, if you look at the trajectory of Christianity, what has happened? For a long time, at least 1,500 years, Christianity and the church terrorized the world. I mean, do you know what they did to Jews? For sure. To Muslims, to others? They were terror. Then, 248 years ago, the first time in history, the United States of America became an institution, for the first time embraced the principles of Abraham and the Bible, which is what? That all people are created equal, all men are created equal, and are endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. People don't realize that before 248 years ago, which is nothing in the scheme of things, that principle was not embraced. Kings ruled, the church ruled, whoever was in power ruled. There was no such thing as equality, human rights, dignity, everything we talk about today that we so cherish, all come from the Bible and from the Torah. Thomas Cahill wrote a great book many years ago, a bestseller called The Gifts of the Jews, presenting that the Jewish values from the Torah have now become part of the Western world's foundations. And that is, again, all documented. You open up a Torah. Who introduced chesed? Who introduced tzedakah?
Chesed would be translated to grace in English, right?
Grace, kindness, love. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that the Christian world has become tamed. They've gone through their growing pains. And today, the United States is not a Christian country, but it was founded by Christians, deists. And ultimately, the principles have now spread to a big part of the world, not everywhere. The principles that human beings were all created in the divine image. Every individual, and therefore has rights that you and I and nobody can take away from them. I would say, regarding the Muslim world, they still have to go through, lack of a better word, their market correction, where they also have to be defanged and eliminate the violent part, and by all means, inspire the world. Inspire the decadent world that you feel is so desecrating God. Why don't you inspire them? Why don't you teach them? Instead of trying to kill them or destroy them. So this is still going through, as I said, market corrections, but the history of Christianity in the modern world, I think, is a very powerful lesson. Tocqueville writes about this, the difference between Christianity in Europe and the Christianity in the United States. I'm not saying it's perfect. We don't have a perfect system, but we have a trend. And the trend, I think, began at the time of Abraham. The battles fought then were about reconciling God in a material world. That's not a simple process. But I will say this, much progress has been made. There's far less violence and far less war. Steven Pinker, who by no means a Jew, but he considers himself an atheist, he documents this, how the trajectory of the world has become less violent, less warlike, much more peaceful. And I would say that's credit to Abraham's teachings ultimately affecting everybody. And that's why I'm a big advocate of bringing people together who are ready to talk, and let's continue that process. And the differences we'll deal with. I think the commonality is much stronger than the differences. That's how I see it. I think in all areas, but you have to get to a point of humility and transcendence. As long as ego, arrogance, and power, that you need to destroy someone else in order for you to be right, that cannot be a consideration. I am sure that in Israel there are some people who would like to kill every Arab or Muslim, but most of us do not feel that way. I don't feel that way. I feel very much that if the Muslims or the terrorists or the people who are violent would put down their arms, unconditional surrender, and they would revoke all their calls for the annihilation of Jews in Israel, what do you think Israel would do? Go to war with them? If Iran did that, if the proxies did that? Because by us, peace, shalom, is the most important thing of all. But unfortunately, we're being forced into war. Now, I know Israel's not perfect, and I'm sure there's plenty to say about how some Palestinians will talk about how they've been mistreated. We've also been mistreated. We were gassed. A third of our nation was put into gas chambers 80 years ago, 85 years ago. So we know what oppression is. And I'm not saying we're perfect, but so to me, the story of back in the biblical story illuminates and tells us what we should be doing today. If we can recreate the Abrahamic vision back from the Bible today, and it's already been developing and growing, that's, to me, the real future.
I think it's
I hope I did justice to this.
Yeah. Do we? Okay. So do I have time to ask you another question? Because it's.
Yeah. All the time in the world. I'm here for you. Whatever you need.
Okay. So. I think it's curious that when you talk about the great religions of the world, what you think of first of all is Christianity and Islam, right? Because they're the big ones that you can really classify as religions. You could maybe say the Chinese, but they're not religious. So maybe Hinduism.
Yeah, but you have Buddhism.
Yeah, but it's not a religion in the same sense, because you could be a Buddhist. It's not the same system of beliefs.
I understand. I said, but I want to say something about Buddha. I'll say it after your question. Go ahead.
Okay, which is interesting because you spoke about the Tanya, the book of the Tanya, and I think it's not very dissimilar from there are some things that it has in common with Buddhism. But anyway, what I was thinking is that both Islam and Christianity have a common agreement of the stories, like the fundamentals of the Torah. Right, the idea of the Abraham, and the idea of the Exodus, and the creation of the world. Islam doesn't mention that, so they don't believe it necessarily. But still, there's still the Exodus, and there's still Abraham, and and in both religions, the Israelites were once the chosen people, right? So both would say that the Israelites used to be chosen. But now not, right? Because it's been superseded either by the corruption if you're a Muslim, or by Jesus if you're a Christian. So what do you make of that? Like, why is this core of the story, why does it have to be in common with all of the great religions? Why do they need it?
Why do they need the story of the Bible, of the Torah?
No, why do they need specifically this part of the story about there once being a chosen nation? They were brought out of Egypt. They had fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then there were 12 tribes. And why do they need that?
Well, first of all, if it's true, for the integrity of it, truth is truth. If it's not true, it's not true. But if it is true, why not be part of the story and the history? Why deny it? If my grandfather was the root of everything I believe today, what do I have benefit from ignoring that or denying that? Why insisting on denying
Okay,
that?
so here's
The
the
only
thing.
way I could understand it is because it's a threat to you. Because as long as the Jews are legitimate, and this is what many Christians wrote, that as long as the Jews remain adamant about their beliefs, in some way it invalidates us because Jesus was Jewish and we want them all to become Christians. That's why they forced Jews to become Christians. Jews never forced anyone to become Jewish because we believe firmly that all human beings are created by God. And you can serve God whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Buddhist, whether you're an atheist. Everybody has their way. So that's number one. Number two, I would say the following. I don't need the credit. If I wrote a book and then someone plagiarized what I wrote and they don't say my name, I don't need it for my honor. But is that really the authentic way to be a human being? The fact of the matter is, there was an Abraham, and there was an Isaac, and there was a Jacob, and there was a Sarah, and a Rivka, a Rachel, and a Leah, and they taught values. Go to any Jewish home. We embrace these values. Every Friday night when we light candles, when we pray, we're not perfect, but we embrace these values. Then there was a Moses, and there was King David, there was King Solomon, there's a whole history. So I'm not saying you have to become Jewish, but if you don't respect that, and you just want to wipe it off the face of the map, to me, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. Like I said, Rambam, of all people, he actually said that Christianity and Islam actually help God's plan. He doesn't say, let's erase it and erase their history. They did things, and I would give them credit even when they hurt us. We still give credit for certain things that they contributed. So I think there's also intellectual honesty. Finally, I will say the following, at a more cosmic level. There's a verse in the Bible, and millions of Christians quote this. I'm talking about the Christian right primarily. I've been to Israel many times. I go to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and I see a group from Oklahoma, from Kansas, from Texas, and I see clearly they're not Jewish. I say, why are you here? So they say, why are we here? This is the promised land given to the chosen people. We want to stand in solidarity with the chosen people. And I say, who are the chosen people? The Jews. These are Christians speaking. And they're proud of it. And they're non-apologetic. They speak stronger about Jews than rabbis do, frankly, between us. So I say to myself, one second here. Why don't they have a problem? I'll tell you why. Because they understand in some of the bigger cosmic picture that it was Abraham and it was the Jewish people that carried the torch until Christianity was born and until Islam was born. So even though Christianity and Islam have their role to play, we're not going to erase the torch that was carried and that Jews continue to carry today. And they fundamentally respect Jews. I really see that. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them do. The founding fathers of the United States respected it because they used biblical ideas to found this country. So I think anyone with a little open-minded understands the value that the Jewish people contributed. And part of that is, yes, I met the Dalai Lama, right? He said to me, first thing he said, I don't understand why Jewish people come to me for direction. I should come to you. Everything we know comes from you. And actually, I want to know from you, he said to me, how is it that the Jewish people have survived without a country for so many years? Because I have that problem. We're displaced from Tibet. And I don't know what will be with my next generation. You've been doing this for thousands of years. How did the Jewish people do it? I want to know your secret. And he told me, any Jew that comes to him, he keeps telling them, go to your Judaism. He respects it fundamentally. That doesn't mean he has to be Jewish. So I think that attitude, to me, is a very healthy attitude. And yeah, maybe when we say the chosen people, we have to understand what that means. They talk about chosen and not chosen. You know what chosen means? Everybody was chosen by God. That's a given. We were chosen because ultimately the Jews were ready to pay the price, even though the world around them saw them as enemies, to bring God into the world when nobody else was ready to do so. Okay? That's what it came down to. When Mordechai wouldn't bow to Haman, when Moses wouldn't bow to Pharaoh, when the Jewish people throughout history refused to conform, nobody liked it, but they continued to hold on to their values. And they have earned a right. Obviously, I'm subjective and I'm a Jew, but I would say they have earned the right to be looked at as a model of what it means to be a godly people. We're far from perfect. I'm far from perfect, but at least a model. And I don't see why any healthy Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or anyone would not embrace that without in any way taking away from their value of what they have to contribute to the world.
You know, it fits this whole thing that you've described about the spreading godliness, right, or something like that, and that it eventually works, right, because the Muslims and the Christians are, you wouldn't agree with their theological thesis, but you would say that they're in the right direction compared to, nothing. And there's this, I think it's a verse.
Yeah, look
from
at the
Bible.
world before Muhammad and after. Yes, the Arab world. Yeah.
So I think it's a verse from the Torah. I might be mistaken, but I think it says "Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah." From Zion, the Torah shall be spread, something like that. The Torah shall be spread from Zion. Zion means Jerusalem. So that's kind of
and Dvar Hashem, the word of God from Jerusalem. Right. That's the verse. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of that's pretty much what you're describing here. Right, because you're saying that the Jews, they don't need to be numerous. They just need to, according to this view, they just need to
I'll
do
take
their
this
thing.
a step further. I think if the Jewish people and Israel, the number one export from Israel would not be necessarily startup nation technology or beautiful beaches and beautiful women and so on, would be Torah, which means the values of the world, the whole world would embrace it. I wanted to add one more thing, if I may. Those people that I met from Oklahoma, I remember one of them said to me, didn't you read the Bible, your own Torah? It says, those that bless the Jews shall be blessed. That's what God says to Abraham. Those that will bless you shall be blessed. We are blessed when you are blessed. And it reminded me of an interesting medrash.
Wait, sorry, just a question about that verse. Doesn't Ishmael also benefit from this blessing to Abraham?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But if Ishmael decides to curse Abraham and his other children, what do you do then? Think about that. So there's an interesting medrash. Medrash is one of the oral commentators that became literature goes back a few thousand years. It says the following. It says that if the non-Jewish world, who have so attacked Jews, would know the blessings that they receive from the Jewish people and the blessings from Israel and the blessings from Jerusalem and the temple, instead of attacking Jews, they would surround them with legions of armies to protect them. And I really believe this to be true. I think that many people understand that. Look, whenever the Jews are attacked, not much after that, others are attacked. Hitler didn't just go after the Jews. He went after everyone, But the point being is, I'm very proud to be Jewish, as you can tell. But I'm also proud to say this. My brothers and sisters are not all Jewish. There's Christians, there's Muslims, and there's Buddhists, and there's others. I just want to say about the Buddhists, if I may, they're very spiritual. There's a lot of deep teachings in Jewish spirituality that are very parallel to Buddhism. I don't know if you know that, how many Jews gravitate to Buddhism, and even the concepts of Brahman and others, some associate with Abraham, because he sent some of his children to the east. So even though it's true, the religious part, as you said, they're not religious in the traditional sense, but spirituality, which is a big part of Jewish thought, the mystical part, you'll find a lot of commonality with Far Eastern disciplines, including Buddhism and Zen and Hinduism and Confucianism and so many others, including Confucianism. Yeah. So I think that there's a verse in the Tanakh, in the prophets, that says that the day will come when Oz Epech Elamim, all the nations of the world, in each in their diversity, will all connect to one God. So we will be diverse and different, but we will have something in common, which is one God. And just as you and I may have different opinions and we have different perspectives, that doesn't mean we can't be brothers and sisters. Like I look at a symphony, a cosmic symphony of different musical instruments and different musicians and different musical notes, and it joins together in a beautiful cosmic symphony, which is defined by its diversity, not by its being a one note or one instrument. It's just that we need to find what Hasidic thought would call the bittel, you need the humility, you need the transcendence, you need the aspect of not suspending yourself in the face of something greater than yourself. That's what those musicians need. And when you submit yourself that way, we could create, I think, total harmony within our diversity.
I'll try to ask you one question regarding that, one final question. That so you've basically presented this worldview that the spiritualism came from the children of Abraham and in some way spread throughout the world. But could it be that human beings inherently have some spiritual element or thought to them, so that you don't need the children of Abraham to spread it far and wide? Like it could spontaneously emerge, let's say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say yes. But like all knowledge, much of knowledge that emerges sometimes emerges from the human natural desire to know, or what you said, the natural spirituality. So I have no doubt that people throughout the different cultures, throughout history, came to certain truths through their own effort, not because someone taught it to them. But imagine combining both. Like some people have natural musical talent. They don't need a teacher. But when they meet a good teacher or a good coach, it just enhances that. So I see the best of both worlds when you can have both your natural inclination, which exists for sure in every human being, but then if you can take time-tested trial and error teachings over the years, including what the Jewish masters and teachers taught, including what secular, or not Jewish, Christian or Muslim or other secular masters taught, then you have the best of both worlds. But I totally agree with what you're saying, that I'm sure it emerged and it continues to emerge, and you try to bring the best of both.
Rabbi Simon Jacobson, thank you so much for your time and for talking to me.
You're very welcome. Thank you.